I know there's no Bloody Mary bar, so I apologize about that, but hopefully we'll get some good Q&A here. I always laugh when somebody quotes my title, which sounds like trying to jam in as many buzzwords as possible. So we have platform, we have AI, but as you mentioned, it really does kind of cut to the core of what we're trying to do as a company. So I thought maybe I'd spend 2 minutes, give a quick introduction to myself, what my organizations are doing at Kraft Heinz, have a couple questions for you, and then we're really just going to cover 3 simple things today. Number 1 is actually knowing who your customer is, so how we're thinking about it as a CPG company. And the key distinction there in my mind is that our customer, and I have this argument all the time internally, is not Walmart. Our customer is not Target. It's not Walgreens, et cetera. It is Joe and Jane and Sarah and Joe and the 99% of households in the country that have a Kraft Heinz product in their pantry. Those people that are actually buying our product through these great retailer partners, that's who our customer is. So question number 1 for us and for you is how well do we actually know who that end consumer is? Number 2, as he also mentioned, is the value of first-party data. So you'll see in a minute here, my presentation literally has 3 pictures. Picture number 2 is winter is coming. So as we think about GDPR, CCPA, for brands and for companies that are overly reliant on third-party purchase data, my personal feeling is that that is a really tough road to travel in the next couple of years. So I'll spend a little bit of time talking about how we as a company are thinking about building out content platforms and efforts internally so we get this really valuable, exhaustive first-party data. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is what do you actually do with that data? So we call it personalization at scale, but it's really, as a company across our 150 to 200 brands, how in 200 milliseconds, which sounds crazy, but in 200 milliseconds, how do we figure out who that person is based on all that data and the profiles we talked about before? And how do we understand, do we bid, do we not bid? If we do bid, what's our ceiling based on LTV? Which one of our brands, so kind of cross-portfolio optimization, which brand are we going to choose to advertise to that individual? And then content optimization, so out of our massive content library, what do we choose to serve to that individual? So again, stepping back, quick introduction. So at Kraft Heinz, I lead 3 initiatives. Number 1 is broadly some content marketing efforts. Our brand is called My Food and Family, but that's the Kraft Heinz brand, largely food-focused, historically very heavy on recipe content. But we have a print magazine, which, crazy enough, in 2019 has 1 million paid subscribers. We're a very active web property with over 60 million annual uniques, and we do a bunch in the email and social space. So again, that's a really valuable property for us in terms of, number 1, generating that first-party data, and number 2, offering us the ability to have that more intimate one-to-one connection with consumers. Initiative 2 is broadly CRM, loyalty, and rewards. This is very new to us, and so as we go forward in this talk, I really want to make this interactive because I'm here to learn as well. So as we think about, again, the data, the personalized marketing, a lot of it ultimately comes down to how do you manage that relationship? How do you incent high-value actions? For us as a company, and I think anybody that's followed the news knows that we've had some challenges and stumbles recently, but I think one of the big benefits we have is this massive stable of brands. We have 99% household penetration in the US. So our big challenge is not awareness as a company. Again, Kraft Heinz largely is just a corporate kind of conglomerate type name, doesn't really mean a lot to consumers, but it's really how do we build that connective tissue across our brands? How do we incent the high value action? How do we get people to buy more of the brands they're buying and introduce new brands to them? So that's initiative number 2. Then number 3, which we'll spend a lot of time on today, is what we call personalization at scale. So again, that's how do we take all that data and how do we make sure that we're not sort of living in that legacy world, which a lot of CPG companies do, and I think a lot of people in this room probably bias towards that today, where how I describe it is, we're standing on the rooftop of the hotel with a megaphone, and we're shouting generic messaging at 10 to 20 million people at a time. And one really important thing in my mind, I try to, oftentimes convey this message internally, is that a push for more personalized marketing, a push around data and tech, doesn't mean that it's not all or nothing. It's not binary. We're not shifting away from the legacy marketing tactics and levers we had that optimized for reach and efficiency. That's always going to have a place in people's portfolio and stable of levers that they're pulling to engage with consumers. But over time, again, a couple years ago, it was 100% that sort of megaphone approach, 0% true personalization. I don't know if it'll ever get to 100 and 0 kind of flipped, but over time, you're going to start to see those lines crossing. And what my organization is responsible for is making sure that we have the data, the profile infrastructure, the understanding of our consumers and that tech stack so that we can actually execute on that when the time comes. So 3 quick questions, just so I get a sense for everybody in the room. Who's actually on the brand side here? So who works for a CPG company? And how many of you do anything D2C, whether you're a pure D2C play or a bit of that? Okay. And last question, who, like in an honest moment, would say that you really understand who your customer is? And again, defining customer as the individuals that are buying and consuming the product. Okay. That's kind of generally what I experience as I talk to people in the industry, because all of us, whether it's on the tech side, the agency side, the brand side, we're all kind of going down this journey together. I mean, my former employer, Amazon, is great at this stuff. And you kind of show up at Amazon, you turn on your computer, and you know who your consumers are, what they browse, what they watched on Fire TV, what they're saying to Alexa, what they're buying, what they're adding to cart, what they're returning, all these different things. For people that aren't Amazon, I mean, this is really hard stuff. The first question that I got asked when I took this role by our board was, you got to tell us what's teleportation here. Because it sounds great. Like, this is such a shiny object. Yes, let's leverage data and AI and machine learning, all this stuff, and let's personalize. Let's serve that perfect message to the right person at the right time. That sounds great. But there is an element of this that, I don't want to call it teleportation, that's 10, 20 years in the future, but I'll share a little bit of thoughts, kind of how we're architecting our roadmap to make sure that we know where we're going, because that teleportation future is important, but that in the spirit of crawl, walk, run, we're also kind of building, we're getting wins on the board, and we're making sure we're adding value over time. So probably wondering why I have this picture of a really old store. I couldn't find a good black and white one, but just roll back and imagine that this was 150 years ago. I always think a great way to think about the value of personalized marketing is, this was the original personalized marketing. Think about a general store in a small town 150 years ago. It's very easy for all of us to sit here and, I don't want to say mock that type of operating model, but we probably sit here and we're surrounded by the most powerful technology and data you could ever imagine. And we think about, Joe running this store, and, it doesn't seem super advanced. But at the end of the day, you talk to Joe, Joe knows every single family in his town. He knows the wife, the husband, the kids. He knows what they like to buy. He knows what they like to browse. He knows the candy the kids like. He knows what they just come in and look at because it's their dream purchase, but they don't buy it. So he knows all the dynamics of this family. I mean, that is the perfect example of somebody that nailed this concept of truly personalized marketing 100, 200 years ago. So what I always kind of task my teams with is, how do we harness that understanding at the person level, but also scale it? Because again, that doesn't scale. That's Joe on his street corner in small town America. He knows who his consumer is, but he's only reaching maybe the 97 families that live in his catchment area. For all of our companies, these are big national, multinational companies. I mean, none of us can eat if we're serving 97 households. So we have to figure out, how can you have that kind of consumer understanding, that intimate engagement, but also scale it? That's really hard. As we talk about the tech that we're trying to build on our side, it's that overlap of the Venn diagram. On the one side, you have personalization. So again, 97 people, all of our companies could go out there and really personalize how we're engaging with them. Scale is what a lot of companies are doing today, which is 1 or 2 messages, 5, 10, 15 million people at a time. You're getting pretty cheap, CPC, CPM. Finding the overlap of those two sides is really hard. So again, contrast that, so that old school understanding at the consumer level, with kind of where we are as an industry today. And I really think that in the last couple decades, because we've had these really cheap tools that focus on reach and efficiency, the pendulum has swung way too far. If I sit down internally at my company and I ask people that own brands and own business units, again, who you're a consumer, after we get by the whole Walmart kind of Target discussion, it's typically, it's millennial moms. It's young guys that like to snack. And yes, I mean, in the world of optimizing for reach and efficiency, that is how you would architect your segments and your personas. But at the end of the day, I mean, looking around here, there's probably a bunch of millennial moms, there's a bunch of guys that like to snack. None of us are the same. And so painting everybody with this broad brushstroke and being forced into this box that the industry and the world has historically operated in, which is, again, painting everybody with this broad brush because that's what Facebook and other people give you, isn't necessarily where we need to get. So I've always tried to have a wake-up call with people internally and say, yes, Walmart's not your customer, millennial moms aren't your customer because they're all very different. Who are they? And historically, the answer was, we don't know, because we had data. It was spread all over the place at agency partners, different tech platforms, spreadsheets, whatever it is internally. What we never had was actually that understanding of who our consumers are. So what we spent probably the last 6 or 9 months on is really, really heavy data engineering work. And that is the completely not sexy part of this whole journey. But if, for people that are at a similar point of kind of evolution, and as you're thinking about this journey as we are, one of the big things I hope you take away from today is focus on that crawl stage. If you're getting pressure internally from C-suite, from the board, whoever it is, to go chase those shiny objects, go focus on, again, this really cool personalization stuff. Like, try to slow play that as much as possible. Because if people rush through the data engineering, the data engineering work that it takes to get to this understanding of consumers, all that other stuff that comes after it, it's not throwaway development work, but it's largely wasted money. So a lot of what we've focused on has been, number one, ingesting the data, which is like herding cats, because again, it's a million different platforms, tons of different data formats. So a lot of what we focused on is canvassing the world, canvassing our partners, asking the dumb questions of what data do you have? Like, what data do you have about our activities, our consumers, and doing that across 150 and 200 brands that have tons of different partners and systems was just craziness, which we can talk about later. But after we did that, then we really got into the data prep and data stitching element of the work, which is also really hard. None of this stuff is rocket science, though, so I think if people have the vision, the strategy to understand who their consumers are, they go out there, they kind of put in the elbow grease and the work to figure out where that data is, be very, very firm with partners that this is our data, we own it, we need to have it live on our side. We're happy to make sure that there's the right element of data sharing so we can partner together. But I do feel it's really fundamental for companies like us to actually own our data, own our destiny, and understand who these consumers are. So I'll stop there on the kind of data piece and ask a question. So, out of the brands out there that mention that whether it's D2C, whether it's through intermediaries, has anybody kind of gone down this journey of building internal consumer profiles, again, at the individual level, ingesting all that data, doing all the data engineering work? Has anybody gone down that path, had good experiences, hurdles, landmines that they can share with others that may be trying to pursue something similar? I see a grimace.
Earlier. Sorry. I'm almost hesitant to share this, but we were talking about this when you were asking the questions earlier. We know who our customer is. We have the data. We choose not to believe it because who we know our customer to be just isn't as attractive and sexy as we'd like to think our product actually is relative to consumers out there. So to even try to go down the path of creating those personas means acknowledging we know who our customers are and believe the data. And that's kind of why I'm grimacing, because we have done it, but then it becomes a loaded discussion about, no, really, this is our customer. No, really, this is our customer. And you get that look of, but I don't want it to be. I don't want to believe this. So can we make them be someone else?
Yeah.
But that's not what the data tells us.
I'm sure
so
other people...
It's a tricky question to answer in some ways. It sounds really very simple to either go yes or no, but there's this weird gray area depending on what the data tells you about your consumer.
Yeah, and I'm sure other people have the same experience, but in my experience, it brings up some awkward conversations with brands and business units and companies because, again, I think all of us have probably always had this, whether it's a pie-in-the-sky vision of who our customer is and how they feel about us, or kind of a wish and where they want to go to. Oftentimes, when you get this data, when you get these profiles and you understand how they're engaging with your media, your products, the water goes out. And to that point, which I think is really important, it does start to shed a light actually at the individual level, because when you abstract it away and you think about massive portions of the population, it's very easy to kind of brush over sales aren't doing well, we're losing penetration, maybe they don't love our product, maybe shares shifting to a competitor, maybe it's a different profile of person that we didn't know we had, we didn't want. And so I think it actually does bring up some interesting points that we'll touch on here in a minute, which is, again, how do you actually leverage first-party data to make sure that you enhance that understanding? And I love Game of Thrones, and I think this whole Winter's here kind of tagline is perfect for this. But kind of going back to what I mentioned before about the value of first-party data, and conversely, how we're all going to be really, really challenged, whether it's GDPR version US, whether it's CCPA, like whatever comes to our shores. This is my personal opinion, so this is not necessarily Kraft Heinz or speaking for the industry, but it's going to be really, really hard. People that are currently almost 100% reliant on data brokers, just having this whole complex model, like I really feel, having worked in Europe for a while, that knowing how they've thought about it, knowing how California thinks about it, that model is going to be really challenged going forward. Not saying it's all going to go away, like there'll be some happy medium probably, but again, I'd say if people aren't focused on generating first-party data, tying it to those profiles, and then using it, how we're thinking about it in a minute, I would strongly recommend to try to start thinking about it. And one really important thing here, which I think goes without saying, is how do you maintain and how do you protect consumer trust? It's very easy, especially when you get into the data and the technology world, and I think everybody here has experienced it as well, to say, yes, give me everything. You talk to some data providers, and I mean, literally they can tell you, obviously, car model of somebody, purchases of, very sensitive categories, feminine care, whatever it is. I mean, we make mustard and cream cheese and soy sauce and coffee. What I always tell people internally is, the front page of the Wall Street Journal test. If it's on there that Kraft Heinz knows that you drive a Mercedes C-Class, and this is the brand of feminine care product that your wife uses, I mean, that is horrible. So again, I think, in the push for data, even ignoring first-party data, so now just say kind of data writ large, I would really say always go back to how do you protect and maintain consumer trust? Because again, if Europe's any example of where we're going, consumers are increasingly going to be able to actually query the data that you have about them, and that is a huge trust breaker. If they go in there and they say, you make ketchup, why do you have to know that I drive a $60,000 automobile? So again, yes, data's valuable. I think we all get that. But if it's something that you can't really pinpoint, this is the value of this data point. This data set's going to impact my business in this way. My personal feeling is like, I don't want to touch it. You can always bring it in the future, but I'm really biasing towards what are the very specific data sets that consumers would be comfortable with me having and can actually impact my business in a good way. So how we've gone about this, and I think we've been lucky that we've had, for the last 15 or 20 years, very active content marketing arm of the company. And for a long time, I think as you saw print media start to quote unquote die out, I think a lot of people internally and at partners we had start to say, you know what, do you really want to invest all this money in a website that's publishing recipes and holiday decorating tips and tricks and stuff like that? Do you want to have a print magazine? Do you want to be doing all this? I mean, that stuff's expensive. We have about 60,000 pieces of in-house content, again, recipes and articles and things like that. To create that content, to maintain it, to syndicate it out through these channels is not cheap. And there was definitely a time before I joined the company where there was a bit of a groundswell of skepticism of, do we need to do this? And honestly, I can't fault that. I mean, I think the writing was on the wall that a lot of these things were decreasing in value, but now we're realizing what a strategic asset that is. We have about 60 million plus annual unique people that are engaging with these media properties we have. That maps to about a third of all the US households, and that's with minimal investment. So now we know for these people, and this is data that, again, from a regulatory standpoint, is not going to be a problem. We know what they're browsing. We know exactly how they're thinking about nutrition and health and lifestyle and their family. That's the kind of data that, at least in our world, is incredibly valuable, and whatever regulatory regime comes down is not necessarily going to go away. So real quick, I want to make sure we're cognizant of time here before I get into the personalization piece. Anything else just on data trust, how to generate first-party data, how to think about stitching first and third-party data, which is really hard. I was talking to somebody about this earlier. Right now, all the consumer interaction data we have from a media and a marketing and advertising standpoint is device ID, cookie ID based. It lives in, I know Moby's here, it lives in our DMP. What we were figuring out now is, okay, well, how do we actually tie that together to all these in-house profiles? So this is a big challenge. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about, again, similar to the comment earlier, as people have gone down this path of investing in first-party media properties that generate that data, and then how you're tying it together to profiles. If not, we'll have time for Q&A after. But
so what kind of first-party data are you accessing?
It's a great question. I tried to skip over that in the interest of time. But I think the big sources that we're focused on now, one is first-party digital media properties. We have a website. So again, that's kind of standard clickstream data. We have some commerce functionality on there. So we know shopping lists, add to carts, products that people were locating, et cetera, email opens. There's also some interesting data sets, and we don't have time to talk about this now, that I think people really under-leverage, which is, as an example, customer service interactions. We have 1 million plus, we call it CR, but kind of customer response interactions a year. Historically, that stuff lived in a database, and the CR team used it. And that is really rich data. We'll kind of transition here, and we'll talk about how to personalize. But as an example, one of the things my team is working on, so again, transitioning from, to answer your question, from the data, the profile world, first party, to how do you personalize, and specifically on that customer service interaction point. What we're going to be doing, and we're trialing this out right now, is Google actually has a really cool natural language sentiment analysis model. It's a simple API you can kind of pass, obviously stripping away any PII, but somebody calls in, they say, I hate this product, there was some problem with it, I don't like the taste, whatever it is. In the past, that data just sat internally, we didn't use it. What we're going to be doing going forward is we're going to pass just the verbatim of that comment to this sentiment analysis model. So we'll know it was this category, it was this brand, and it was a really negative interaction. What we're going to do with that then is actually avoid a situation where we seem really tone deaf. So today, if you call up and you complain about Grey Poupon because there was, it was a bad bottle of mustard or something, there's a good chance that 3 days later, you're on ESPN.com, you're going to see an ad for Grey Poupon because that brand was trying to buy your audience. That sounds really dumb. Like, as a consumer, I'm like, guys, I just called you, and I just said I don't like this product, and now my my web surfing experience is saturated with this brand. So what we're going to do to answer that question in kind of a roundabout way is we're going to have a blacklist internally. So somebody calls in either through customer service, on social media, and they're saying either I don't like this brand or I really like it for a period of maybe call it 90 days. We're going to make sure that in partnership with our DMP, DSP, digital ad agency, that we're actually not serving an ad on that brand to that consumer. So a lot of it is really thinking about these kind of hidden insights at the person level, and then tying, again, the profiles, some of these first-party data sets we talked about, into this broader tech stack. And a couple last comments on the personalization piece is, as I mentioned before, it's not all or nothing. I always try to think about our customer base as a pyramid. The top are those super fans, the brand loyalists. Those are the people that just love our brands. It absolutely makes sense for us to invest, pay more to understand them and market to them at a personalized level. The bottom are the people that only are going to buy our products if they're walking the aisles at Kroger and something's on sale. Juice, probably not worth the squeeze for us to really spend up, try to understand who that family is, get data, personalized to them. And then in the middle, there's kind of a mix of both. So, first point here is that, this is an augmentation exercise. This is not a replacement. So the legacy ways of engaging with consumers are not going away. We really want to think about augmenting it. Number two is crawl, walk, run. So again, we're not trying to jump all the way to having this hands off the wheel, completely automated, crazy AI-driven marketing approach. It's really saying, our hundreds of marketers that are sitting at their keyboards internally, how do we take the Excel way of working that they're doing today, and how do we actually inject some more data and technology and understanding of consumers? So start to bring the organization along with us, and then all the time working towards that long-term future. I talked before about avoiding shiny objects. So again, I'd really try to hammer home that message. Focus on the basics, focus on the foundational elements that really lead to that future of ultimately where you want to get to. Then I'll close with maybe just a couple quick examples in addition to that sentiment analysis example of actually what we're doing with all this data. So I think that sentiment analysis one is an interesting one. The other that I'd focus on is, and we talked about this in a meeting earlier today, how we're leveraging. Facebook has some pretty cool tools in the custom audience and lookalike world. So today, like everybody, if I'm a brand at Kraft Heinz and I want to try to do some campaign on Facebook, I'm working with my digital ad agency. Again, it's all external. I'm basically sending them a brief, sending them some money. They're going to Facebook and they're figuring out, how do I reach this big, interest-based segment, kind of persona group of people? That's fine. What we're trying to do, and we're actually literally running a pilot that we started last week, so unfortunately I don't have any results yet to share, but what we did for one of the teams that I manage is we took our internal profiles. We said, in an ideal world, if Facebook gave you every piece of data, which they clearly don't anymore, and you could be really surgical in terms of how you're targeting an audience, how would you do it? And they came up with great ideas of, somebody that's never complained about my product, somebody that opened this email that we sent 4 months ago that had this specific, recipe and article in it, somebody that's browsed this category and this brand a bunch of times on our website, and somebody that's purchased at least X units of it. So they had all their criteria, and they came up with that group. So within our entire profile universe, they whittled it down, and they came up with, here's the 5 million people that I want to target. What you can do then on Facebook is we uploaded that to Facebook's custom audience tool. So just simple, we used email as an easy identifier. Facebook then matches that, figures out of those 5 million people, how many people have an account on Facebook. Great, so now we went from, again, basically punting all the responsibility to Facebook. Now we're in-house building custom audiences with our first-party data, but still leveraging the reach and scale of Facebook to try to reach those people. Then the last thing we did, because again, that's ultimately whittle it down of those people that are actually on Facebook that we can effectively serve an ad to, maybe you get a couple 100,000 or 1 million people, which is, it's meaningful, but it's not as large as we want to get from a reach standpoint. So we leverage Facebook's lookalike audience. So we're saying, I want to expand that audience. So out of those people, let's say we ultimately targeted 1 million people with our custom audience campaign. Find me people across the entire population of individuals in the US with a Facebook account that look like those 1 million people. So just to wrap up, I actually think that that's a great example, and we're still working through exactly how to execute that. That's a great example of taking first-party data, selectively taking a little bit of third-party data, building this internal understanding of consumers, but then leveraging, again, the big, massive behemoths out there that we can't ignore because they have the reach and they have the connectivity with these consumers. We're being surgical about targeting audiences we build in-house, and we're also leveraging things like lookalike modeling to try to expand that and get some more reach. So I know we're a little bit over time. I want to save a few minutes for questions. Anything on people's minds, challenges, opportunities? Again, as you can tell, we're in the middle of this journey, so definitely don't have all the answers, but happy to share any insights or experiences that we've had.
Ryan, as you know, I was really curious about the print piece. That when we were on the call, I was really blown away by how important the print magazine is to sort of forming this core. How is that evolving? What's the trajectory of this? Is the print magazine piece sort of suffering the same decline as print generally? And are you doing anything to sort of replicate that experience online so you can get that same kind of capture for those who aren't engaging in print anymore? Does it limit you? Does print limit you? Is there a particular subset that it's able to capture?
It's a great question. So I think, print for us has been relatively stable, and part of that has been just strategy. So we haven't really tried to overly invest in it. We're not actively trying to recruit new subscribers. So like anything, you have some churn, you lose some people out of the bottom of the funnel, we throw some more subscribers in the top. So I'd say on your first question, relatively stable. But the big question is, what do we do with that? Because, again, print is not an interactive medium. I actually don't know, you stopped on page 19 and you browse this feature about some partnership we have with Oprah and healthy eating and whatever. Literally, we ship this to you. I know that, yes, you've purchased magazines, so maybe that tells me a little bit about your household, but it's sort of disconnected from a lot of the stuff on data and technology we're talking about. So what we're thinking about is, number one, from an actual content standpoint, how do we marry digital and print? So with our website, with the print magazine, how do we do a better job of cross-pollinating on the content and the experience, so augment print with digital, which I don't think is going to shock anybody. But then the second thing, and it actually extends beyond print magazine to our physical products, is how do we tie these physical things to our digital ecosystem? And that's hard. I mean, I don't love the user experience of QR codes. Somebody typing in a URL is not great. But getting back to, we have 99% household penetration. So we essentially have a mini billboard in every home in America. And right now, most people have no idea that Grey Poupon and Philadelphia and Maxwell House and all these brands live under the same roof. We're not incenting them to buy one. We're not rewarding you for buying the other. We're not driving you from the physical product or the magazine to the website. So this is something we're actively thinking about now. Is it a bug on the packaging with a URL? Is it QR codes? Is it something with voice? So do we do a partnership with Google or Microsoft or Amazon with Alexa? You try to have some kind of an experience. You're a parent, you're cooking, and your kid's yelling and screaming. You have your box of Kraft mac and cheese in front of you. Do you have a frozen 5-minute story or something that plays through voice, and then somehow that brings you back to the website? So I'd say in a roundabout way, it's something we're actively thinking about. Print is great. I think it's great from a content marketing or brand awareness standpoint, but it is challenging to figure out how do you actually tie that? How do you generate insights from a physical medium, which doesn't give you any feedback? And how do you then drive people back to digital properties as well?
Ryan Watson, thank you very much. Ryan's going to be with us in the next couple of days. You can drill deeper into with him.